Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I am TC Ricks, and this is the third in a series called The Sins of Silicon Valley. I'm titling this section The Magniot LIne because I feel that the view that Silicon Valley cares about our privacy and are advocates for our privacy is, quite frankly, insane. And the reason I titled it the Magniot LIne is because from a military perspective, the Magniot LIne is one of the greatest failures in military history with only benevolent intent. So we've all heard of the Titanic and how it was unsinkable. And for those of you who are even remotely familiar with medieval history, Agincourt is considered one of the greatest victories by one side over another, in which the longbow pretty much was instrumental in allowing the Normans to kill off an entire generation of French aristocracy, which caused all kinds of changes in the region, including the adoption of the longbow. The Magniot LIne was a barrier conceived by the French government pretty much all along the French border with Germany. And it was actually fairly impressive from a World War I standpoint in the sense that it had a huge amount of artillery, it had air-conditioned, heavily fortified and reinforced bunkers. And essentially, it, from the mindset of early 20th century World War I warfare, was the ultimate pre-trench, right? Like, they drew the line, and they drew it well, and so far as I know, anyway, the actual bunkers themselves were not taken as for what they were designed. In other words, they did what they were designed to do. But when the Germans ultimately decided to invade France, they did a couple of things that just bypassed this. The first was that the vastly superior German Air Force did the Blitzkrieg and basically moved over it. And then the other part is that since they were already pretty much convinced that they were perfectly fine drawing Britain into the war, that they just went around it because the French did not actually build the bunker between themselves and the Belgians, justifiably, because from their perspective, the Belgians were perfectly fine, but they didn't actually extend that barrier to Belgium itself. And so in typical decentralized policymaking at the time, what was a nominally impenetrable barrier on half of the northern French border did absolutely nothing for either Belgium or Luxembourg or France in terms of stopping the Germans in the rest of it. So when I talk about privacy, I want to talk about the two leaders in privacy, which are going to be Google and Apple, both of whom have taken extreme steps in protecting their respective devices, Apple with Apple devices and Google with Google devices, to make sure that they are encrypted, to make sure that if you actually set your phone the right way, that even the company itself cannot actually undo the encryption on your phone. So much so that there have been a number of headlines recently that that involve complaints by the federal government about the encryption, since they can no longer just automatically know what you are saying or doing in the days that were pre-Snowden, after 9/11, when you could just scoop up all the text messages and all of the phone calls made in the country, legal or illegal, according to the Patriot Act. But to be honest, I have some problems with this, right? So the first one is from a Google perspective. For those of you who may not be aware, but Google has an ad relationship with Facebook. And for those not familiar, Google might and Apple might have a positive reputation as far as privacy is concerned. Facebook most definitely does not. Facebook's had a number of data breaches. Facebook has a very gaping hole API. Facebook has been fined by countries that have real privacy laws, for example, Europe, numerous times for data leaks. And more importantly, Mark Zuckerberg is good friends with a guy named Peter Thiel, who is essentially the rights guru for targeted, highly aggressive alternative facts, bullshit, ads on Facebook and other media to basically make stupid people make even stupider decisions in favor of things like Brexit or electing people like Trump. Now, from the right's perspective, this is perfectly fine, but from everybody else's perspective, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And later, I'm going to do a podcast specifically on each of the 5 so-called horsemen of Silicon Valley, which are Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. And each of them has their own problems, as does pretty much every one of the second-tier companies, including Twitter and Uber and, Gerberdage Schnur and Pets.com and, pretty much every random tech company you've ever heard of. They have problems, and they have a horrible reputation, almost all of them, and they'd have an even more horrible reputation if you knew some of the crap that they were doing. But the truth is, they actually enjoy a very positive reputation because they do things like pretend to recycle and have a progressive, positive view on social policy and be pro-LGBT. But the truth is anything but when you actually drill down onto some of the details. Google in particular had at one point and actually practiced the concept of do no evil, but since they have been mainstreamed by Wall Street managers, they are routinely at odds with their own employees, and specifically I'm going to point to 2 incidents recently where the Google employees had to do a walkout both for sexual harassment and a sexual harassment culture by Google management employees, but also an attempt to do a sneaky search engine in collaboration with China so they could get their foot in the door there in collaboration with the Chinese government. So while the rank and file employee at Google is just as do no evil in mindset as they were previously, the same can definitely not be said about Google management. And the fact of the matter is that no matter what Google's reputation is in terms of protecting the privacy of its users, and it does have not only a reputation for doing that, but an interest in preserving their own brand, when you enter into a whole-scale alliance with a company like Facebook, you are opening the barn door to let the horses out. And the fact is that it does not matter what safeguards Google puts in place if Facebook, which already has a ton of user data on everything that you do on every platform that Facebook owns, which includes Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram, but also virtually every website that touches the Facebook API, and that is a ton. But basically, if the app has a Facebook login, then it is my opinion, and there are other people that share some of this, but we definitely know that they have previously used cookies to track you, even if you don't even have a Facebook account. So let me repeat that. Facebook has been known to track you even if you don't even have a Facebook account. So regardless of what precautions you think you may take, Facebook has a ton of data on you, more than likely. So when you combine that with the data that Google has, which is virtually every web search that's made, or at least a significant chunk of the market, a significant chunk of Gmail or Google News, or the use of your Android phone, the most valuable property that Google has is its knowledge of its customer base that lets it provide advertisers with targeted ads that are not nominally useful for the consumer. Now, Google tries to justify this incredible data they have by building a nice, huge firewall between the systems that target the ads and the systems that generate the data. And from what limited research I've been able to do, it appears that that's correct. But the problem is that just like, as I mentioned, the Magniot LIne, if Google separates the ability of its internal users to abuse that data, it does no good whatsoever if they enter into an alliance with a company like Facebook that has no such line whatsoever. In fact, is actually on record as having embedded users with, or embedded employees with the Trump campaign. Then you can take it to the bank that not only the things that you do on Facebook, but the things that you do with any Google platform are ultimately going to end up with Facebook. And let me give you an example of how that works, right? So if you search something on Facebook, suddenly you might see an ad in Google that shows you the same, the thing that you were looking for. Or more importantly, if you do a Google search, we all have experienced where suddenly on Facebook, we're seeing ads based on the Google search that we did. And even if every single element from a Google perspective is protected and walled off and it prevents a Google employee from abusing this information, there is no such protection on the side of the Facebook side of things. So that means that even if the data is supposedly screened and anonymized, the truth is that you can basically reverse engineer that data. So let me give you an example of what I mean, right? So if in an attempt to keep things private for a Google customer, you do a search for, let's say a medicine that you have for a disease that you have. And Google ethically files off, your name, but has like a token that makes you a uniquely identified person, but so that Facebook can theoretically target that an ad for that medicine that you're looking on Facebook, right? So in theory, it's all anonymized. The problem is that while that might work for a Google ad that you see on Google, on Facebook, where they have no ethics, and Mark Zuckerberg is basically an ally of Trump, they can scrape the data that you see off of Facebook for this medicine and correlate it to your Facebook account and say, Google is sending us ads for this medicine for this person doing this search. Oh, well, it doesn't matter that I have this unique token that makes this person anonymous because I can attach this token to this person. So the point is that you effectively have no privacy on Facebook. And if Google has an alliance to Facebook, then that means all of the Google data that you use that can be obtained by Facebook, which if your Facebook is going to be an awful lot of data, then what you have is imagine a line between Facebook and Google where the supposed protections for privacy do not exist. And more importantly, since Facebook and Microsoft, and to a lesser extent Amazon, but definitely Facebook and definitely Facebook and Microsoft have not met a government request that they didn't like. If something goes bad with the government, you can bet that Facebook will share all of the data that it has with a bad regime. We know that they do this. There are numerous instances where Facebook has shut down accounts or horrible things have happened to dissidents from countries that have bad regimes. So God help us if something happens in this country, and no matter what safeguards Google or Apple have, if there ends up being a dictatorship, like they plan on fleeing to Europe and moving their servers to Europe with the touch of a button, Facebook has no such ethics and will immediately turn over all your data to a bad regime. Or worse, a good regime that has nothing but the best intents, but will still do bad things with it. And last but not least, I come to Apple, which, so far as I know, does not have any such agreement with Facebook. But the problem is that Apple has a very cozy relationship with China. And China has something called the Great Firewall of China, which is designed to not only keep bad information out, but also to control the entire virtual lives of all of its citizens. China has a huge government infrastructure to screen every social media site and any information that they deem as disrespectful or inappropriate for their citizens to see, including a lot of things about democracy or freedom of choice or freedom of speech. And as long as Apple has a very cozy relationship with China, it's very difficult for me to trust the safety of not only their infrastructure, but quite frankly, their devices, because let's not forget, Apple devices are manufactured in China. So everybody, or at least anybody familiar with tech, has read all kinds of news articles about Huawei and the government basically saying, hey folks, 5G from Huawei is bad because China will obligate any company that works in China to cooperate with them, and they will have no choice. So if your data is going through a 5G tower owned by Huawei, you can pretty much take it to the bank that China is going to know everything about it. And yet, at the same time, we basically have chips manufactured in China, phones manufactured in China for Apple. So Apple goes on and on and on about how secure from end to end their operating system is, and yet this is a country that specializes in controlling the data of its citizenry, and Apple has no ethical qualms whatsoever about manufacturing their supposedly secure devices there. Now, I want to be clear, there's pretty solid evidence, as far as I'm concerned, about the leak between Facebook and Google, because no matter how good Google's reputation is, we know Facebook leaks, right? That's something that anyone can prove. I have no direct evidence about the insecurity of Apple, but I personally find it ludicrous that we're going to say that Huawei leaks like a sieve, but an American company that manufactures a device entirely in China with Chinese chips and that just has their own software is somehow more secure. Let me tell you a basic fact, folks. It doesn't matter how secure your software is if your hardware leaks. In other words, if the chip in your Apple device is designed in China and has its manufacturing in China, it doesn't matter what software Apple puts onto that phone, China owns that phone, right? Because the chip itself, you can put instructions in the very foundations of the phone that will allow them to spy on what you're doing. Now, they might not be able to get all the data. I'm not an expert on this. But I definitely know that hardware beats software, and the hardware is manufactured in China. And quite frankly, no thought, as near as I can tell, is being given to securing American infrastructure from a bad regime or a bad company in the case of Facebook. So, like I said, this is planning that is done for France, but doesn't talk to Luxembourg and doesn't talk to Belgium. Google isn't thinking about the information that it's leaking by proxy to Facebook, but then again, I guess Google doesn't think it's their problem, right? I mean, as long as Google doesn't have its users leaked, it doesn't matter how much information is available by Facebook reverse engineering that data. And Apple, as long as Apple doesn't have its internal Apple operating system breached, it doesn't matter if your location data or your contact data or God knows what else is available at the hardware level is leaked from an Apple device. So, yeah, my point is that Silicon Valley, even the virtues, even the things that they're supposed to be good at, like privacy, are not what they appear.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other marketplaces. Copyright 2020 Red Anvil Amalgamated.
To fight the forces of evil!